Hi everyone. So in this video, we wanted to talk about decision making because from my experience when I had my eating disorder, I felt totally overwhelmed by all the hundreds of decisions that I had to make in a day, and decisions that now I wouldn't really even think about. It's almost like they just got blown up and they just became so much more overwhelming um, than they are now. And I would kind of obsess over certain decisions I had to make, or just stress all the time about certain decisions. And usually it was kind of the quite small decisions that had to be made that I found really, really difficult. So we just wanted to have a conversation about that and what it was like, and maybe kind of offer up some thoughts about what might make it a bit easier.
So I think, and it might be helpful for us to have that conversation, me asking B questions, because as a carer, it felt utterly bewildering when we were, for example, if I was supermarket shopping and deciding whether to get blackcurrant squash or orange squash, for example, and B being unable to make that decision. Or it might have been, and this was when we didn't have a food plan, should it be rice or pasta? And because for me, I'd have got a feeling, actually, yeah, blackcurrant would be nice, or yeah, no, rice, I'd go with rice, because I felt it. And yet those questions just sent B into such a tailspin that I would get and angry, and it felt like something that was like that became this all-encompassing massive decision. So what was that about? What was going on at the time?
I mean, one of the probably one of the most challenging things I found was that example. So particularly when I had to go into supermarkets, or if I was going to a restaurant or something like that. I guess when I had choice, when I had more choice, I think it was easier when, I mean, I kind of forced you to buy the same stuff all the time. So it was like that decision making was almost taken away from me, because I had that routine and that predictability, which meant that I didn't have to make those choices and those decisions because I found them stressful. So for me, kind of taking away that choice, it made it more bearable, and I didn't have to think about it so much. But when we would go out, and I would just be would go out to the supermarket and be standing in front of the sandwich section for a good kind of 20 minutes, me just panicking, really. And actually that went on for a long time. And even sometimes now I kind of catch myself. There's kind of a residual habitual thinking that occasionally pops up, which I now know that I don't need to listen to. But there was so much, I mean, mental arithmetics going on, trying to work out what I could allow myself to eat. There was a bit of, what did I actually want to eat? And it was just totally overwhelming. I would have much preferred to just be told what to have, or just to have two choices that I picked from. So yeah, I found it really, really hard. Yeah, and it felt like it just took up so much brain power, and I would just be exhausted afterwards.
What was the fear behind the kind of the choices, if you like, that drove that?
I think it was the fear of making the wrong decision. Yeah. And I obviously didn't see at the time that there wasn't a wrong decision. I think I was maybe afraid of if I did make the wrong decision, what the eating disorder voice would then say to me, or I guess what the consequences might be. I never really ever found out what the consequences were because I never disobeyed it, which is obviously one of the ways in which the eating disorder keeps us in check, is that it scares us so much that we don't even try to test the boundaries, even though those are completely empty threats. So really the fear was that kind of discomfort, and the mental thought storm that would follow if I felt like I had made the wrong choice. Yeah, and it felt like there was a lot of pressure to make the right one.
Gosh, that and that's interesting, because as well, it wasn't just around food, was it? It was just life in general, I guess, was all of those decisions that were to be made. You know, a bath or a shower, or should I get this bus or that bus, or any of those things, really.
It was everything. I mean, obviously it was particularly heightened around food, but yeah, it was I think it just, because I'd got into the habit of kind of finding decisions so stressful and anxiety inducing that it kind of it ran into other things as well, about what I should or shouldn't wear, or all sorts of things. But it was definitely more so around food. But I think it just, I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust.
Say more about that. You didn't trust yourself.
I don't think I trusted myself to make the right decision. Again, even though there wasn't any right decision. I was so focused on listening to the pros and cons that were running through my head, and trying to work out what I was allowed to have according to the eating disorder, that I wasn't listening or didn't care about what I actually wanted. That was way at the bottom of the list, because I could have told you instantly what deep down I wanted to have, but
it was usually pizza.
but that was off limits. So I didn't prioritize my own joy or enjoyment when it came to that kind of stuff. It was very much kind of caught in my head.
So a couple of questions come to mind, and one of them is about, so what's different now, but we'll come to that one. What advice would you give to somebody that's either has an eating disorder themselves now, or to carers and parents who are wanting to do the right, wanting to do what feels like the right thing for them in helping? What would you say?
I mean, now I mean, now looking back, it's like, who was I actually trying to please? Like this eating disorder voice in my head, what was that made of? what did I gain out of following the rules that this imaginary thing had set for me? So I mean, now I do what I want. For a long time, I still got caught up in the, yeah, but what should I have, kind of according to the societal, I don't know, beliefs about what is good or bad, or kind of leftover stories from the eating disorder. Obviously, there are the shoulds that come from the healthcare professionals, which is different, which is all about kind of making sure that you're having a balanced diet when we get out of the habit of kind of knowing what that looks like. So obviously that's important, but for me now, it's I put myself first above this imaginary thing, which saying that out loud might seem really stupid, because it's like, well, yeah, of course, because the eating disorder, it doesn't exist. It's in my head. But I think firstly just acknowledging that, yeah, it can feel really tough and it can feel really overwhelming, and you're not alone in that. But just start to tune back into you,
yeah,
and start to talk to them about what they want.
Yeah.
And what it would actually be like to allow yourself to give yourself what deep down you want. I think I certainly overrode that such a lot that I didn't, a lot of the time, well, like some of the time I could definitely tell you what it was deep down that I wanted, but it was like I just squashed that voice down so much that I didn't even allow myself to hear that.
Yeah.
I didn't kind of entertain that at all. But it's like all of these empty threats from the eating disorder, kind of starting to see those for what they are, which is empty threats. It might give you a hard time if you choose to follow what you want, but it's like a toddler having a tantrum, that they want to try and get your attention, and they'll say whatever hurtful thing it is to get your attention, to get you to listen to them. But actually, the louder it gets, there isn't a correlation between volume of the eating disorder and how true what they're saying is. It's not like that at all. It's about tuning into how you feel. So is it feeling like, are you kind of full of worry and anxiety and feelings of not deserving and that unworthiness? Are those the feelings that you're experiencing? And if so, we've talked about this in other videos as well, about how that's such a great sign it's like a little warning sign that actually the eating disorder is kicking off a bit and is saying some really unhelpful things. So in those moments where you're feeling totally overwhelmed with decision making, because the eating disorder is making you weigh up all the pros and cons and work out which ones you can and can't have, which feels stressful and anxiety inducing, just taking a moment almost to recalibrate, to almost recenter yourself, and just notice what is going on. Notice what the eating disorder is doing, and then just starting to give yourself permission to not take that so seriously, and it's like giving yourself permission to not be afraid.
Yeah.
Which can seem, which you may be kind of thinking, well, how is that even possible?
Seeing it in a different way, isn't it? It's like, do you know what comes to mind? That video that you shared with me yesterday or the day before about Monty. So Bee's got a puppy called Monty who was playing in the garden, and you were blowing bubbles. All right. So all of these bubbles, which are like thoughts, decisions, if you like, and actually seeing Monty just literally grab a bubble, and it kind of it explodes, and he kind of blinks a bit, but then he gets on and does it with another one. And it's on that kind of came to mind, is that those bubbles are like thoughts, and they're not made of anything. They may give you a bit of a pop, if you like, when you choose to ignore it, or you choose to act on something different that's more helpful. But you could, as a child, you think a dog might be frightened of those bubbles, or a small child might be frightened of those bubbles because they don't know what's inside them, what they're going to do. But actually, when the first one, when you pop it, it's like, oh, there's nothing, it's air, which is the same as the thoughts.
Yeah, I think particularly the ones that seem so scary. And particularly when we believe them for so long, it can, about the kind of the consequences of making the wrong decision, that when we've bought into that for so long, trying to see them as just a thought bubble might seem totally ridiculous. We get that. And we get that it's a completely different way of seeing it.
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the other things that we do now is making decisions based on what feels warm and what feels cold. And this isn't about what is right or wrong, because that is totally subjective. And actually, you can argue that there aren't really wrong decisions. But it's about following our gut and our heart, and what deep down feels warm. Because if we follow that, it's like there's nowhere near as much thinking involved. We're kind of taught to draw up these pros and cons lists, and that will help. But how many times have you actually drawn up a pros and cons list and then actually made a decision based on it?
Yeah.
So often we do that, and then we're just like, oh, actually, I think I might go with this thing, or it might be a third option, or we just go with our gut feeling anyway. So what would it look like to build that into our day-to-day lives more often? And I think it ties with what I was saying just a minute ago, about kind of paying less attention to the chatter in our heads, and tuning in more to our deep down feeling. And we might not have allowed ourselves to listen to that for a while, but starting to maybe familiarize yourself with it again, and start to consider like what might be some warm decisions. What does that feel like in your body compared to the maybe cold decisions? And this isn't about the warm ones being necessarily the easiest ones, because certainly from my experience, when I had the eating disorder, the easy decisions were when I was kind of keeping within the strict rules of the eating disorder, because that became my comfort zone.
But it was
so it's
cold,
not
right?
about yeah. So it's not about consulting the eating disorder and what feels warm or cold for them, or what's your kind of automatic go-to response, because that feels like the easiest one. It may be that the warm decision actually feels a bit uncomfortable because it's taking you out of your kind of so-called comfort zone, but actually deep down it feels right. It feels like it's further towards that right direction.
And maybe you can involve somebody that you love and trust in that, so that they can ask you the question. If you're struggling to make the decisions, is to ask them to ask you that question: which feels warm and which feels cold? And I'm here to support you and help you as I'm your cheerleader as you make that warm decision. I'm here to support you. And maybe that would be helpful, so you don't feel so isolated when you're making what could feel like really different decisions.
I sometimes feel that like having tattoos on the back of my hand to remind me, because we do so often.
Post-it might work just as well.
yeah, that's true. Maybe stick with that, put some post-its up around the house. I think we do make, we make thousands of decisions every single day, and so many of them aren't conscious. And so many of them we do on autopilot, and we kind of forget that it's actually a choice at all. So it may be that actually just starting by noticing what some of those might be.
Maybe the ones that aren't so heavily loaded meaning to begin with, just day-to-day decisions. Which shower gel shall I buy? That kind of thing. And trust, and maybe that's it. Maybe it's in those types of decisions then you can learn to trust your gut. That it's like, well, I don't know why I chose that one, but it just felt right.
Exactly. That was the right one. Trust. And I think trust is a huge thing. Because like I said at the start, that I just didn't trust myself to make the right decision. But actually, if we're changing the way we see and kind of interpret what right or wrong actually means, then we're taking that pressure off ourselves. Because actually I wasn't trusting myself to make the right or wrong decisions according to the eating disorder. I wasn't worried about worried about making the decisions for me. This was me trying to not disappoint and kind of piss off the eating disorder, basically. So no wonder why I was terrified, because I didn't really know what it wanted all the time, and that could change moment to moment. So actually, like if we're completely changing the way we see that and actually tuning into ourselves more and our gut, then we're trusting in something completely different. And I think that takes the pressure off massively. But also just like when you're thinking about this, notice when you might be judging yourself, or judging if you feel like you didn't follow your gut in one moment and actually you wish you had. Just give yourself a bit of a break and acknowledge that this is tough and it can feel really overwhelming sometimes.
And we're saying something maybe completely new for you here as well.
Mm.
You know, moving away from the pros and cons to actually warm and cold.
Mm.
And consider that. So yeah, giving yourself a break.
Yeah. So I hope this has been helpful. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and we will be sending out a new video every Monday. So stay tuned for the next one.